is here. Welcome back to my channel. Well, in this new episode of our podcast show, we are talking about the computer languages. Were you curious why people can communicate it with computers? And do you know that C++, Java, and Python, both and all of these kinds of computer languages are conlangs? Well, today we are discuss this topic with our guest today, Drach. Drach, can you introduce yourself to the listeners? These kind of uneducated listeners.
Hi, I'm Drach. I have a YouTube channel about conlanging. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Okay, so do you know how the computer languages works? Or can you express the concepts about how we code into the computers? Because you know that it's like 101010 and so how did it work?
So computer languages kind of work by translating text written on a computer into a set of instructions that computers understand. The code that we write is easier to understand than looking directly at the ones and zeros. So like Python and C++ and Java, like you mentioned, they're more English compared to the ones and zeros, which are really hard to understand. So instead we made coding, which is kind of a conlang, really. The concept of coding is pretty much to be able to quickly write the set of instructions for the computer to understand. And it's easier for the human to understand it. So if someone looks at a bunch of ones and zeros, it would be really confusing. But it would be hard to look back at that code and say, oh, this is this part, this is that part, and insert a piece of new code.
Sure.
However,
I had some experience of coding, but I'm very curious why we are typing English right, but how do the computer transliterate these kinds of English words into 10101?
So that's quite a complicated process, but in essence, there's something called a compiler, which it knows all of the grammatical rules, the syntax of the language, and it knows what each word in the code translates into as far as the code for the computer. And it will basically just translate it into the ones and zeros, which the computer itself at the lowest level will understand.
Okay. So it's like the computer must to decode these kind of English phrases into its own language, right? Okay, that's clear. And why should we talk to machines, in your opinions?
Well, if we're talking about talking to them in a human way, it's very helpful to people who can't interact with computers using their hands or will struggle with such a thing. So people who are hard of sight, kind of like blind, they might have a smart home system to be able to complete daily tasks quite easily. Or if someone has a disability where they can't move their fingers easily, they might use their Google Voice Assistant on their phone or Siri. Or you could use it for when you're driving, because you don't want to look at your phone or use your phone when you're driving, but you might ask it for directions to a service station.
That's cool. And so it's like we are asking the machines to do something.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so they didn't have some free wills. Okay, and as we know that the AI, the artificial intelligence is very popular in these years. So can machines have their own languages in the future, in your opinion?
To an extent, I believe they can. There's kind of two different ways they could do this. If they were programmed to do it, they are kind of limited to what the programmer has set them to say. Yes. However, if they are learning it with machine learning, they could really go only up to a limit that's set. So if you've literally sat a computer in the middle of a field, not connected to any internet, but you've given it a camera, it could start describing objects around it, but it's only limited to that. It could absolutely have a language, and they kind of do really. So when computers are talking to each other across the internet, they are using different protocols, which is kind of language in a way. It's saying this needs to go there, and it's carrying this. It's kind of like that, I guess.
I think it's about the definitions about what is a language. What is a truly language? Yeah.
Because I wouldn't say that the protocols between computers talking are a language, but they also kind of are.
Yeah. Well, as you know or not, I was studying psychology in my college, and I have some experience about languages psychologists, and I think that the machine learning is not really like how that's doing in our brain. It's a kind of difference, because the machine learning is like reading a lot of information and having a pound of research or resources, and have a single rule. But our brain didn't work like that. Our brain is like we have a concept and we modulate this kind of thing.
Yeah. If we did machine learning, it would be able to understand it to a very, it'd be able to make a language to a very basic level. We'd have to obviously tell it to say, okay, describe this object, you'd have to tell it very specifically what to do. But languages could kind of be made and learned with machine learning.
Well, that's like the animal's signals behavior or so when we're talking about the machine's languages.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's clear. That's cool. So basically, we are making machines. It's just like we are creating an animal.
We won't need humans before too long.
Yeah. Okay, so this kind of questions will be very interesting. Does the information we express to the machines just a translation of our speech, or can it carry all the meaning we want to tell? Because in human speech, it will be like combined with emotions, with moods, with other things, but can the machines understand that, do you think?
Yeah, I'd say so. Because, again, I'll bring it back to machine learning, because with the language, it's kind of our best bet at this point.
Yes.
If machines could end up picking up patterns and stress, and they could end up working out how mood works and how tones work, I mean, they kind of do, really. They could completely end up understanding these things. Not that they'd be able to reply or understand in depth the meanings, but they'd be able to pick up and say, yeah, it's this mood, or this is the word that's stressed. He's talking about this cat over here, or something like that.
Well, it's as in Chomsky's theory that we have the depth of different kinds of level of the grammar. So I think that machines might know the surface level of the grammar, but the deep level will probably it's hard for a machine to understand. For example, as you know that people can lie, can saying anything that didn't fit its mind or something, because people just complicate it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main limitations of computers, really. They're just they're a bit too simple.
Yeah. So that's really will it make a problem when we are talking to the machines?
Problem. So I guess it's kind of going back to what you just said, really, with how computers are a bit fixed in one position. They don't really know how to understand more complicated manners of speech, more complicated, if someone's mad, if someone's lying. There's a lot of things that are limiting them. They'll only be able to know the words for now, and anything else that's fairly simple, but they won't be able to learn much more than that. And one of the problems that they face currently is based on accent. Accent's quite a hard one to understand because there's so many around the world and so many variations.
Yeah.
To teach the machine to understand every single accent is a huge problem.
Yeah. But is that very precise, or it's well? I know that our brains wasn't precise at all, so it's fair. Yeah. So the next question is: can computers really learn a language? It's very interesting.
It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
It depends on what learn means, really.
Yeah, it's very philosophical.
Because it's like the computer could learn it in a Google Translate kind of way, and it might know the grammatical features. And does that mean it's learnt it? I mean, not that Google Translate's perfect, but if it was, does that mean it's learnt it? Because all it's really doing is translating it between languages. I guess learning also implies that you have an understanding of the language. So does it mean...
Do you know the Chinese room paradox? Is it paradox?
No.
Oh, well. It's about if the computer will have a real intelligence. So as you know that there's Turing test. Do you know the Turing test?
Yeah.
Yeah, so someone is discussing with the Turing test because it says if we have a room and there is a Chinese dictionary that contains all the Chinese words and the grammar of the Chinese, and this room has a man in there, and the man didn't speak any Chinese, but when he searched the dictionary and the rules of the grammar of the Chinese, and he might pretend he can speak Chinese. So it's like the machines to the people. So you might think that Google Translation can really speak languages, but it's just like searching and feel the words.
Yeah, that is one of the problems with Google Translate, is that it knows grammatical features. And like if I had a list of the grammatical features and I had the dictionary for any language, I could probably translate any language.
Right.
Obviously, it takes some time, but you could translate any language quite easily, and that's kind of what Google Translate's doing. It's just knowing how to respond. It's the problem again with
text.
it's the problem with the word learn. What does learn really mean?
It's actually how the machine learning doing.
Yeah. I think
but is that really learn a language?
Once machines can translate language, they're probably smart enough to do a lot more things. Pretty much.
But it's learning or not? It's very philosophical. Yeah, so what's your opinion?
Language, but not a computer. I'd have to say no, unless it had proper proper sentience and was able to learn things as we do. I don't think so, because taking in information, putting it through a rule set, and spitting it back out again is not really learning. You could do that with anything. You could solve a Rubik's Cube that way, but it doesn't mean you can solve a Rubik's Cube if you took the Rubik's Cube to some random location. Just because if you don't have that tool set, then you haven't really learned it.
But do you think in the future that the machines can really learn? Or
I don't think.
Okay. So why?
As I say, I just don't think that computers are too logical. They take in one thing, they put it through rules, and then they put it back out again. And that's literally how everything works with computers. You do anything to a computer, that is exactly what happens. There might be a few ways around, like a few detours, let's say.
I think that will really limit the development of the artificial intelligence. They can do something, but not all the thing, because the schema is just like that. They just learned a lot, but didn't create anything or something. So as we talking about the creativity, so as we know that one of the features of the human language is it can be creative and contain new things and ideas. Also, the abstract concepts, would that be able to do the same in computers? Can their languages be creative? How do you think?
Well, it depends. Can computers be creative? If computers can be creative and they have a language, after that it's just a case of describing what they've created. As someone has, let's say someone's made the first fusion reactor, which is very nice. They would describe how that works, but they wouldn't need to do much more than describe what it's made of and what to do to get there. That's all that a language really needs to do, is be able to describe that. Abstract concepts, however, they're more difficult, because abstract concepts, that's something more like God. Something like love, which is kind of considered as abstract concept, isn't really abstract. It's a feeling. It's more of something that you struggle to describe. It's not indescribable to an extent, but I guess even God isn't. There isn't really anything that a language can't describe in some way. Like if you said how you describe colours to a blind person, you couldn't. But we're not talking about a blind person. We're saying how would you describe the colour blue? You'd say the colour of the sky. How would you describe green? The colour of plants or grass, at least. There's nothing a language couldn't describe if it had some sort of adjectives in relation. If it's a functional language, it can be created.
But that will be interesting about the abstract concepts. So, as we know that math and physics are also abstract, but I think that computers can really understand that, right?
Yeah. I think most of this question is based on if computers can understand things, as opposed to their language. Because if a computer can understand it, the answer is yes, the language can be creative. If they can't understand it, then it's nothing to do with the language, it's the computer itself.
It's cool, because I think human is also like that. We can describe something we are familiar with, describe something unfamiliar is very hard for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And another question is, how can we define creativity?
Define creativity.
Yes, because if we want to know the language being creative, we must define the creativity. So,
well,
mm-hmm.
Again, I wouldn't say that a language itself could be creative.
Oh,
but
really?
Yeah, because the language is only a tool to help you describe a concept, such as a hammer or a set of screwdrivers. They can't be creative. They are tools. So is a language, really. A language is just a way to describe something or pass along a message.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What is creative is what is used in the language.
Yeah, I think the definitions of creativity about human language is that human language can use very simple things or very limited things to describe unlimited things. Like we can use just 2 words, but having like thousands of sentences.
Yeah, exactly. That though, it's again doesn't make a language creative. It just makes the language. If you don't have those things, doesn't necessarily mean your language can't work. But it means it's not descriptive. I think it's probably a better word. It can't describe many things. And I think there are languages that don't describe things in the future or in the past. I'm fairly sure. I think there's 1 or 2. I don't know. But if a language is like that, there's not really much need to describe things. They only need to name they only really need to name things. Because you don't need to describe go to the blue building or whatever. I mean, I guess you could, but it's difficult. It's a really hard question because languages themselves aren't creative because that implies that they have their own sort of free will of thought to be creative, but they are descriptive.
Cool. And would there be any problem in communicating with machines?
Yeah, accents, as I said earlier, are one of the main problems currently that we struggle with. Because if someone had a very strong accent that isn't recognized by a computer, then it might be a struggle for them to understand and translate or pick a response because they don't know what they intended to say. Another one is idiom. Idioms are a big problem because you could say it's raining cats and dogs and they'd think you literally meant it's raining cats and dogs.
That might be very confused to the machines.
Yeah, exactly. So they'd have to be trained to know how to use idioms and slang all the same.
Yeah, and I think that's why we need debug thing because we need to training them very, very many times.
Exactly, yeah. That's why Google Translate's still not done. It's still going.
So, well, that's interesting that you're talking about the idioms. That is also what a human being can do in birds. For machines will be very awkward for them because they might. Because I think that idioms will be a kind of creativity to the human language because we can use so kinds of weird stuff to describe a thing.
But is that creativity in the human language or the mind of the human?
Human's mind. Wow, yeah, that's very Yes, that's true. So
Yeah, it's like saying
computer
that
be
a paintbrush.
creativity? Do you think?
Computers creative.
I think it might be, but
I'd say in a
Mhm.
way, because they can obviously produce random things. That's kind of what being creative is. But part of being creative is also knowing what looks good. Obviously, that's based on opinion, but they know what's good and what's bad and how to produce good or bad things, which computers already do. Not perfectly, but they do that. There's computers that make music by themselves with no any extra input, except for changing variables. There's computers that literally make faces, artwork. Computers already are creative.
But I think it takes time to another level of the computer.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. So, the last question is: would machines' languages alter humans' languages? If a machine has a language, definitely.
That depends on the scenario, because if a computer is going to want to speak to a human and they don't speak the same language, if the computer is creative enough or smart enough or can learn, the human and the computer might end up creating a pigeon language.
Oh yeah, pigeon language.
That's one of actually, then again, if you think of other languages, there's a lot of loan words from languages in other languages. Even now, there's still loan words coming from languages into others. And the same could easily just as happen the same with machine languages. If a machine maybe creates
their own languages.
She creates something? Well, no, just the concept in general. If a machine creates something, then we might use their word for it. Therefore, they've technically altered our language, even if it's just by adding a word. But in a bigger sense, like if you mixed two communities together, I don't think it would, because computer and human languages would mostly remain separate.
Cool. So, about computer languages, I'm very, very fascinating about the coding things and the human brains and the computer brain were very different. So I'm very curious, because if we do a lot of research about the computer languages, it might help us to understand how the human language become and began. So, how do you think about that?
The problem is with computers is that to find out how our language developed using them, they'd have to be put in the same situation as we were.
Yeah.
Because computers, they would have to have a limited way of communication like we do. We can't communicate via telepathy.
Well, I know that there is kind of a method is talking about that. Do neural simulator or something. So it's like the simulate of a human's brain.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I can get what that is. I don't think I've heard of it though. Like a neural network.
Yeah, neural network. That's no.
No? I don't know.
Oh,
But, yeah.
Oh, okay, whatever. Well, it's
Yeah, but
also a model of artificial intelligence. So it's neural network. Yeah, I think the name is that neural network calculator or something, or simulator, whatever. So I think it will fit the brain. It's like a proto brain of a human. So yeah, I think it will be able to help us to study about the humans' behavior, like speaking or something, or languages.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't know about the origin of language, because that would have to mean that the computer is put in a similar situation of having it needs to communicate to survive. Which, I mean, we can do by just, basic neural network training. But there's a lot of other things, like communicating the idea for like pain and stuff. Having a lot of abstract concepts. If a computer doesn't really have vision, it will say sky, but it might not know what like the color blue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. So, computer has their limitation.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. But, will that always be, or I think in the future, the limitation will be less and less. Let's see.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait.
Yeah, it takes time, really. Because
time is time's the main factor in everything.
Yeah, the technicians is just happens like 10 years, so let's see. Okay, so I think it's all for this episode. Do you have anything you want to say to the listeners?
I don't think so. Just thank you for watching.
Yeah, or you have any YouTube channel or something you can just say?
I do.
Yeah.
It's Drach on YouTube. I do language-based videos, and I'll probably be moving to more interesting things when I can get the time.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that's this episode of our podcast show. So you can not only hear these podcast shows on YouTube, but also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and I think we don't reach to the Google Podcasts, or don't find them on the Google Podcasts. And we have Patreon now. So if you want to support me, just Google Patreons about Salum podcast, and that's it. Okay.